Hey everyone, I'm Kim, the mom boss behind EmeryandK. Welcome back to my channel. Today's Tumbler tutorial is going to be a new take on a design created a few years ago by Vanessa Davis of VMD Designs. So her tumbler was a peekaboo. I made a bunch of them and I hate doing peekaboos, so I came up with a way to make it a faux peekaboo. Let's get to it. As always, we're going to start with our fully prepped cup. Today I'm using a 30-ounce fatty from Stainless Depot. I'm going to be painting it with two colors from Color Shot, Sugar Coat It, and Let's Get Cozy. So after I sanded and washed my cup, I did give it one quick coat of white paint from Rust-Oleum. I did this because my Sugar Coat It is almost gone, and I wasn't sure if I would have enough to do this, but I wanted to be able to move right into the next step after I got the colors painted on there. So I did one quick coat of white, and now we're going to go in with that Let's Get Cozy. This is a beautiful cool toned gray. I love this one. So what I want to do is just have a little bit of gray fading up from the bottom and down from the top. So this is another good thing with that white base coat layer is I won't have to go in with as much white in the middle, if that kind of makes sense. Like I can really just kind of focus on getting that good little fade in with the gray and then move on to the next step. So I'm holding my spray paint about 12 to 18 inches away from my cup, and I'm just tilting it. I'm doing light sprays. If you get too close to your tumbler, you're going to get more of a heavy spray, and I just really want a light one. So now I'm going to take my Sugar Coat It, and I'm just kind of showing you guys, I have it like turned at a pretty sharp angle. Here I'm holding it about 10 inches, and I am doing just super light sprays, and I'm just constantly moving it up and down my tumbler facing the top, and then I'll repeat this for the bottom to help just make that fade from gray to white a little bit softer and easier. I'm sorry that I'm kind of out of frame here. Literally, I can't film spray painting without going out of frame at least once. It's just like how I do it, I guess. So once I am done with that white, I'm going to just go in, touch up any little spots on that gray that I might have gotten a little bit too much white. Doing a spray paint ombre like this, or a fade, whatever you want to call it, just really is about slow baby steps to get where you want to go. Just take your time. Don't be afraid to have to pick up, one color, fix a spot. It's all a learning process. So I'm just going to go in. I want to make sure that the center has a nice solid white. I don't want any gray. And then I'm going to let this dry for just a few minutes. These Color Shot paints dry like 5-10 minutes, and we'll move on. All right, so here's where we're going to start to create our faux peekaboo look. So this here is Tacky Tape from the Glitter Guy. It is their double-sided adhesive sheets. I just found a Christmas bulb shape in Design Space, and I cut it on this scrap piece of Tacky Tape using the heavy cardstock setting, so it cut all the way through. I have 4 different glitters that I've picked. Magic School Bus is the yellow, Reagan's Illness for green, Monster Blue for the blue, and Ruby Slippers for the red. So a traditional peekaboo, we would glitter our whole cup. We would have to do a coat, sometimes 2 coats of epoxy to make sure it was perfectly smooth before we could put on our decals, spray paint, wait for the paint to dry, remove the decals. This way, we are going to skip a ton of steps, and we are just going to glitter exactly where we need. It's so much easier. So here I'm just kind of mapping out with some painter's tape where I want my decal to go after we do our lights. This isn't necessary if you don't want to kind of block off where your decal is going to go. That's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't putting lights where I want my decal to go, because I didn't want my decal to go over the lights, if that makes sense. But again, totally optional. So I'm just going to mask it off with 2 little pieces of painter's tape. So now I'm going to take those little light bulbs that we cut out of our Tacky Tape. I'm going to peel one side. It doesn't matter because both sides are exactly the same. I'm going to peel one of the backing sides off, and I'm just going to start placing my light bulbs all around my cup. Now, I don't want them going in the same direction. I don't want them kind of in rows or any type of pattern. I just randomly kind of put them on there however I think they look cute. So you can do as many or as few light bulbs as you want. I kind of like to have a little bit more light bulb action on there because I think it's adorable. But if you want to do less, you could certainly do less. Now, really the only thing I keep in mind when I'm doing this is I'm going to be drawing on with a paint marker, the little string that holds all the lights together. So I want to keep in mind kind of the flow of my strand of lights. I also want to keep in mind I'm going to be putting an offset around these light bulbs. So I want to make sure that they're not super close together so that the offsets don't like touch each other or lay on top of each other. If I'm articulating that right, hopefully so. So I'm just going to continue around my cup, place my light bulbs where I think they are cute. Like I said, making sure I'm varying the direction that they're all facing. Don't think about this too much. Sometimes I get in my own head when I do these cups and I think about too much of a pattern, but just put them where you think they look good, and then we will get to the lines, and that's where we have to think a little bit more. But for this part, just put them wherever you want. Once we've placed all of our light bulbs and we like how it looks, we're going to move on to glitter. So the most important thing with this cup as far as glittering goes is make sure you start with your darkest color and work your way up to your lightest. So Ruby Slippers is my darkest color. I'm going to take off like 4 or 5 backings on different light bulbs. Again, I'm not going to think too much about this. I just kind of want to be aware. I don't want my colors to be like right next to each other. I want them to be close, of course, but not right next to each other. I'm not going to do any type of pattern. I'm just going to remove where I think it looks good. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle on my glitter. And then I will take just a fluffy old makeup brush that I have and dust off the excess. And then we'll just do this process all the way through each of our glitters. Once you've finished with your glitter, you're going to go ahead and do 2 coats of your Rust-Oleum 2 times clear glass spray, let it dry, and put on a coat of epoxy. Once it's cured, you're going to move on to your light string. So I am using this black paint marker from, I think Posca is how you say the brand. It came in a set from Amazon. I will, of course, link that in the description box below. So doing the lines really is simple. You just have to think a little bit about the placement. So I prefer my lines to have a lot of like the little loopies and swirlies and things like that. That, of course, is a personal decision. If you want to do less of those, go for it. So my biggest tip with these, and I just messed up right there, is not to pick up your paint marker unless you are where the loop connects to each other or where that little spot is that you go over on the light. I hope that that makes sense. But you can see like where I picked up my marker in the middle of that line, I had to go back over it. It's a little bit thicker. Not a big deal. Nobody else is going to notice it but me, but it's just kind of a pain to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind as you are doing your strings. Now these paint markers, the reason I really like this brand is because it dries incredibly fast. So you really don't have to worry about your hand smudging what you've already done. But if you use a different brand, like I think the Sharpie has a brand of paint marker, those ones I find take a little bit longer to dry. So just keep that in mind that you're not smudging what you've already done. So I am just going to go through all of my lights and I'm just going to connect them. I end up, I think, doing 2 different strands. You could, of course, do 3. You could try to make it all 1. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Just do whatever you like on it. The reason we put a coat of epoxy over this, in addition to sealing in our glitter and making it a little bit smoother, is because if you mess up, you can go ahead and remove your lines with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a paper towel or a cotton swab or whatever. So it's not permanent, whereas if we were to do it directly on the paint, it would be nearly impossible to remove without also taking off the paint. So just kind of take your time with this, but try not to overthink it at the same time. I feel like I said before, I get into my own head and I overthink things, and then I end up making the process a lot more complicated than it it needs to be, and that kind of takes the fun away from the art. So we're going to go ahead and finish our lines, and then like I said, these markers dry pretty instantly, and then I'm going to go right into another coat of epoxy. After that coat of epoxy is cured, we're going to move on to the offsets for our lights and our decal. So to make the offsets for our lights, I just, in Design Space, with that same light shape that I used for the tacky tape pieces, I did a 0.05 offset on that, and I cut it out of just black vinyl. So these are super simple. Once you cut them and weed them, you're just going to pick them up with your transfer tape, and you're just going to put them right over your glittered lights. I always make sure to cut a few extra of my offset in case I mess it up when applying it to my cup. Sometimes I don't get it lined up straight, or there's like a weird gap or whatever, and I prefer not to have to fire up my laptop and my Cricut machine again to cut. So always cut out just like 1 or 2 extra in case you need them. After the offsets on your lights are done, you can move on to your text decal. So this I just found in Cricut Design Space. It says Merry and Bright. You could always look through Cricut Design Space and find something that you like, or your Silhouette Studio, or find something on Etsy, whatever kind of just draws your eye and you like. Go ahead and put that here for your decal. So I opted not to do an offset this time. You guys know typically I always offset my text decals, but this time I think it just kind of went better without the offset, and I couldn't really figure out a color that looked good. So after some trial and error, I decided to go no offset. So I just cut it out of regular black vinyl. I am, of course, going to measure to make sure that I'm getting my decal on straight, because there's nothing worse than getting it crooked and having to peel it and recut it and wasting time and materials. So I'm going to apply it like I always do using, I think this is called the hinge method. I just kind of peel back about half of the backing and trim it off, rub it onto my cup, and then do the other half. Typically, I will just kind of do the entire decal at once, but this font, for some reason, I think because it was kind of loopy and delicate, didn't want to stick to this transfer tape, which was very annoying, but after some fighting with it, I got it on. Now, after we get our decal on, we're going to go in with some more epoxy, and you guys know I love adding mica powder to my epoxy to give my tumblers the best shimmer ever. So I'm going to be putting in some mica powder in my epoxy, and we are going to be sprinkling on some chunky glitter. I feel like those two things really just take this cup to a whole new level. So into our epoxy, we're going to be adding this ultra white mica powder from the Glitter Guy. And I just put a sprinkle into my cup. You can also add it into your epoxy when it's already in your cup, but I didn't want to have to waste my gloves and take them off and put them back on after I mixed my epoxy to put it in here. So I just sprinkled it in my cup beforehand, and I'm going to go ahead and pour a couple of tablespoons into this cup, and I'm going to mix it really well, get that mica powder, get that mica powder evenly distributed in my epoxy, and I'm going to apply it to my cup. Now I am doing what I would typically do for a regular coat of epoxy on my tumbler. I always do that when I apply chunky glitter because it helps it lay nice and flat. So for the chunky on this tumbler, we are going to be using Big Spoon from the Glitter Guy. This is the most beautiful chunky holographic. I'm showing you guys that sparkle in the mica powder. Oh my gosh, it makes a world of difference. So I'm going to pour my Big Spoon onto my paper. I'm going to take some and sprinkle it on the bottom, and then I'm just going to dip my fingers into that glitter, and literally I just kind of showed you guys, rub my fingers together so that it just lightly sprinkles and cascades down my tumbler. So I am holding my tumbler at an angle, so that helps just the glitter sprinkle down naturally, and my hand, while I'm rubbing my fingers together to sprinkle on that glitter, I would say is about 8 to 10 inches away from my cup. So I do that on the bottom. I'm going to repeat that process on the top of my cup until I'm happy with the amount of chunky. So for me, I wanted just a light sprinkle, a little bit more at the top and bottom rim, and then having it just kind of lightly cascade down into the middle of my cup. If you end up having a little bit more chunky on a light than you want to, you can just use a little popsicle stick to kind of scooch it off of there. You won't notice it. You know, if you're moving the epoxy and the glitter around, it'll self-settle and you won't notice it at all. So after I'm happy with this, I'm going to put it back on my turner, I'm going to let it cure, and then I'm going to go in with one more coat of my Rust-Oleum clear glass, and then I will go in with my final coat of epoxy, and my cup will be finished. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, maybe a little bit inspiring. If you did, I would love a thumbs up on my video. If you want to see more tutorials in the future, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, happy crafting!